Do we have free will? Do we make choices? Or are our choices actually determined before we're even presented with a choice by external influences and past experiences? This is one of the major philosophical discussions, the debate on whether or not we have free will. And I took a philosophy class in college. I'm sure that I've mentioned that before, hopefully. And this was one of my favorite topics. This video will primarily focus on the debate between determinism and free will, but it'll also cover a few different trains of thought and arguments within both of those sides, or you could say between them, like indeterminism or libertarianism, existentialism. So yeah, let's just get right into it. I should probably define determinism and free will. Free will would be the ability to make choices for yourself. The only animals that would have free will are conscious beings, mostly humans, maybe some more intelligent creatures like dolphins or gorillas, but this debate is primarily focused on humans. And then determinism is those who reject free will. And this philosophical concept has been around since ancient Greece. It's very old. And it basically claims that all events, including our actions and choices, are predetermined. Logically, according to determinism, we have no free will because our choices are already determined before we make them. The choices that we make are things we would have always done in that moment, given our past experience, our current situation, and our expected outcome of making this choice. I think that an example would be helpful here. What if I told you to name a fruit? You can name any fruit, but let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that you picked bananas. Well, why did you pick bananas? Maybe you ate one for breakfast. Maybe you saw one in the kitchen before leaving your house this morning. Or maybe you're just really passionate about bananas and like bananas, you know? For one reason or another, when I asked you to pick a fruit, you said bananas. If we could go back in time to that exact moment where I asked you to pick a fruit and you had no memory of me, already asking you, and we just went back to that exact moment, you would always say banana. Because that's what everything leading up to that moment led you to choose. If I asked you again, your answer might be different, but in that exact moment, your answer is always the same. And if it's the same, then you didn't really choose, did you? You felt like you chose, but it was actually a bunch of other external events that made you say banana, or rather caused you to say banana. Like I said earlier, this train of thought is ancient, but the term determinism is actually a lot more recent than the train of thought, if that makes sense. It was coined by the Irish philosopher William Hamilton. One of the arguments for determinism would be behaviorism. This was made by 20th century American psychologist named B.F. Skinner, and his argument focused on environmental conditioning. Skinner believed that free will is an illusion, and that our actions are actually just responses to environmental stimuli, which he divides into two categories. The first one being positive reinforcement, and the second one being negative reinforcement. If you've taken psychology classes, then it's more than likely that you've heard of these, or they, at the very least, sound somewhat familiar to you. An example of this is if we smile at someone and they smile back, we're more likely to do that again because we were given positive reinforcement to do that action again. But if we smiled at someone and instead of smiling back, they like spit in our face, we were given negative reinforcement and we're less likely to do that again. He applies this to pretty much everything we do, stating that a person's behavior is controlled by his genetic and environmental histories rather than himself. Freudianism is another argument used for determinism. If you've ever taken a psychology class, you're very familiar with Freud. But just in case you don't know, Sigmund Freud, who is another psychologist, his studies were very focused on like the unconscious mind, the id, ego, and superego. Both of those probably ring some sort of bell if you're somewhat familiar with any of this. But yeah, he talked a lot about the unconscious mind, the part of the mind we're unaware of, and the influence that it has on our actions. He believed that the unconscious controls nearly everything we do in ways that we usually aren't aware of. And you can see this at work, like in marketing, advertisements, restaurants, stores, casinos, like all of these send subliminal messaging to your brain, right? Casinos have like really ugly flooring so that you look at the flashy, bright, like fun looking games, and they don't have clocks on the inside so that you don't know how long you're like in there gambling. McDonald's colors are supposed to like the yellow and the red are supposed to stimulate hunger. Stimulate hunger. Advertisements are always like purposely made to be flashy and colorful to get your attention. Like you can really see just places in general using the unconscious mind of the general population to their advantage, if that makes sense, with like subliminal marketing. But yeah, these all appeal to the unconscious mind in different ways. They were just examples I thought of. And yeah, Freudianism is commonly used as like an argument for determinism because it clearly shows that we are not consciously in control of a lot of what we do, or it clearly argues that, rather. The French neuroscientist Benjamin Libet actually performed an experiment that somewhat proved some of what Freud was saying was correct, like to a certain extent. Keep in mind that this was a while ago, but the results from this experiment were kind of grim. He wired up a bunch of patients' brains, or subjects, I guess, and he gave them two tasks. He set a giant clock in front of them, and he told them that at any point they needed to flick their wrist, like just move their hand. And then the other thing they needed to do was note the exact moment that they decided to move their hand, if that makes any sense. The results were kind of scary. They showed like a shocking pattern that the part of the brain responsible for the movement lit up before the subject had noted that they decided to move their wrist, if that makes sense. So the pattern is the part of the brain responsible for the movement lights up, then the person seems to be aware of it, then the wrist moves, which kind of scary because it shows that the unconscious brain does the action and the mind only becomes aware of it after the brain has already decided to do it. Although he did argue that there's a gap between the period that we unconsciously are going to do it and the moment that we move the wrist. And he argued that this is free won't, that we have free won't, because at any point in this moment between like our unconscious mind firing up and the actual muscle movement, the conscious mind has the power to veto the action and stop it, pretty much, like send the signal back and not move the wrist. So I've talked a bit about determinism and some of the arguments for it. Logically, I should probably talk about indeterminism, which is kind of the direct opposite to determinism. This train of thought was coined by William James, and it's the belief that not all events are determined by prior causes, and some events are by choice or just completely random. However, it doesn't automatically prove free will. If we do something for no reason and it's an entirely random action, then that still doesn't really mean that we control it. It just kind of means that it was random, if that makes sense. And like indeterminism doesn't really cover this. This is a part where it sort of falls short, and this is called the luck objection. This problem, though, is addressed by libertarianism, which is another ancient belief. Mostly the groundwork was kind of laid by Aristotle, but libertarianism is actually in like full support of free will. This shouldn't be confused with political libertarianism. This kind of libertarianism is only philosophical. That's what I'm talking about here. So, anyways, this belief completely rejects determinism, and it states that the future is fundamentally open. A person is free at the moment of making a choice, as long as there are other choices that the person could make. That's what libertarians argue. They also argue that when making a decision, you feel completely free to choose either option up until the very last moment that the choice is made. And this universal experience that we all feel when making a choice is pretty strong evidence for free will. And libertarians also point out that if determinism is true, like if everything that the determinists say is correct, then criminals are not to blame for their crimes. But we still have like criminal justice systems and we hold them responsible. And they say that it's because we intuitively know that they are responsible for their actions, which is a fairly large contradiction to determinism, because if we have no control over what we do, then logically we are not responsible for what we do. Finally, libertarians address the luck objection mentioned while talking about indeterminism. Libertarianism leaves no room for luck. It separates events into two different camps: event causation and agent causation. Event causation is event causation is where one event causes another. Like, think of a chain of dominoes, right? One domino falls, the next falls, the next falls, the next falls. They just keep knocking each other over. It's like if you're playing basketball out in the street and it bounces off the backboard and hits the car windshield, then the car windshield breaks. You know, like, it's just a chain of events. Agent causation is where a conscious mind or agent causes an event without anything prior causing them to do it. Like if you just decide to go for a drive, you know? And even the basketball example I gave was kind of a poor one. The example within that of event causation would be the basketball hitting the windshield, so the windshield breaks. But then within that, there's an example of agent causation as well, and it would be you throwing the basketball at the backboard, if that makes any sense. But anyways, these two types of events, I guess, they turn choices that would be considered random events by indeterminism into something commanded by a conscious being or person. This is one that I found very interesting in my philosophy class. And while researching this video, I found that nobody really talks about it in the argument for free will. And it is existentialism. I found this one so interesting that I wrote an entire essay on it. But like I said, I don't see it talked about much, so I thought I might as well bring it up. A long-standing belief in philosophy is that essence precedes existence. To make it simpler, something's nature determines the type of life it will live, its existence. Existentialism, which is represented mostly by the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. I don't know. I'm just gonna. I can't say French names very well, so I'm just gonna call him Sartre. But existentialism reverses this belief. Sartre believed that actually existence precedes essence. This would mean that our choices actually determine our nature. Therefore, our very existence is determined by the choices that we make. However, Sartre takes us even further. The reason I found this concept so interesting is because Sartre believes that you are responsible for everything that happens to you. The choices you make put you in every situation you are in. Even if someone's holding you at gunpoint and robbing you, it was your decisions that led you up to that moment. He also states that we are condemned to freedom because we can never really escape choice, can we? We're constantly deciding things, and even if we purposely ignore our responsibility to choose, we're actively making a decision to do that as well. If I decide that I'm done making choices, I guess, and go live in the woods for the rest of my life, I still chose to do that, and I still have to make choices in the woods. You know, you can't escape this by any means, pretty much. So, we're about 20 minutes in, and you might be asking yourself a few questions. Like, why is this important? Which one should I believe? Or even, like, what is the point of knowing all this? There are a lot more concepts and beliefs surrounding free will that I didn't discuss here. And to be honest, I can't provide a concrete answer to any of those questions. But if I were to try, I'd say to believe whichever one is most convincing to you. If you're convinced of one of the arguments for free will, then great. You can easily hold yourself and others responsible for your actions or their actions. Because free will logically concludes that one is choosing to do something bad or good. But if you found one of the deterministic arguments more convincing, that doesn't just mean that everyone gets a moral pass to act on their impulses. Regardless of free will, we have laws to maintain a functioning society, and morals as well, to keep people from doing things that are harmful to everyone else. And we should try to rehabilitate and teach those who break those rules and laws. No matter what argument we find convincing, learning about these concepts as a whole helps us become much more aware of ourselves. And if free will does exist, then awareness of the decisions we make and why we make them is probably the first step towards it. And yeah, that's the end. I don't have much else to say. I'm playing Call of Duty in this video because I got a little bit tired of playing Minecraft, but yeah, thanks for watching. I'm gonna try to post another video sometime soon. So stay tuned, and once again, thank you.